Archie and Friends 152. It starts with Jughead actually losing a pie eating contest. Usually he's portrayed as having such an appetite that it seems supernatural. So it's surprisingly realistic that he can lose an eating contest. And I understand why it would be written, because the writer would want a surprise after always writing him the same way. It is realistic that a person wouldn't behave the same way you'd expect them to every single time, so I guess it's an acceptable out of character moment. Then he wonders how it happened a second time. So am I actually supposed to believe it's supernatural, like a curse? Or is he just freaking out too much? As unlikely as it sounds that he would have been cursed twice, him being cursed would make more sense. His friends comfort him. I see Sabrina in the background finally looking how she's supposed to again as time is wasted. And he worries that he might lose the burger competition too. Then Jughead sees Sabrina near funnel cakes and says he found the solution. There's some people playing music behind her, which makes it harder for him. And then he wonders where she went. And I'm completely confused when Jughead says in front of him that he needs to find a teenage witch. You know, it's kind of weird that Sabrina's letting Jughead remember that she's a witch, because the Little Sabrina series made a good point that if he knew she was a witch, he might be hitting her up to summon burgers constantly, which seems likely because he's always hitting up Archie for money, and he doesn't have very good willpower. Also, the only way Reggie could not know about witches and witchcraft after the events of the last issue is if his friends deliberately decided to keep him in the dark about everything that happened with Darlene. Which is a very wise decision on their part, considering that Reggie in the 70s Sabrina cartoon was constantly trying to reveal that Sabrina's a witch out of spite. I appreciate the shake-up to the status quo that the writers were bored enough to let Jughead know she's a witch. It's just that he stayed oblivious for so long for a reason. There can't be spy witches if he still remembers. Either that or they're cool with mortals knowing if they're trustworthy, which has to be the case in the sitcom because Harvey remembers. And they only see mortals if they're talking to witches, because when Jughead said the words magical, spellbinding, and witch in front of mortals there, that wasn't trustworthy. Also, it's weird that Reggie thinks he's a weirdo here because of what he said. Before, if any Archie character knew she was a witch, it was Reggie, because he's smart but not too focused on science like Dilton. There was a comic where he was trying to prove she was a witch. Jughead gets Sabrina's attention, unnecessarily scaring her by saying witch, and after she lampshades him being too loud, she hopes he hasn't had another curse placed on him. Jughead explains himself, and when he wants her funnel cake, she warns him that he's obsessed with food, as if that's a surprise to her, and suddenly asks him if he learned anything when he sold his metabolism to an evil witch in Jughead 200. I wish he didn't say the witch, because she's a witch too. Naturally, he says that he only learned not to deal with bad witches, and he wants her to cast a spell that'll help him win the contest. Which makes sense because he's mostly worried that he'll lose face in Riverdale if he loses the burger competition, so he won't have a reason to care if his victory is legitimate. He just doesn't want to lose. And the situation is desperate, so it doesn't necessarily prove that he's going to take advantage of her at the slightest opportunity yet. She agrees to help him, but it won't be in the way he thinks, so I guess he couldn't trust her. She tells him to follow her, and somehow expects me to believe that she can't cast a spell in the middle of a busy fair. And somehow they need a secluded place. That's never been true. Through the entire history of the franchise, she's been casting spells right next to mortals no matter how crowded it was. And that was good writing because it slows down the pacing if she has to take off and go to a secluded place before casting every spell. Suddenly she has a reckless plan to make him love more than just food, because she figures that once his mind is open to other things, he won't obsess over silly contests. What makes her think that caring about more than food would make him not scared of losing face if he loses a contest? That won't make him immune to shame. And I thought that her not wanting him to win because of her cheating with magic meant that she was more moral and responsible. But planning to completely change his personality is irresponsible. She tells him to close his eyes and relax. There's no reason that'd be required for magic either. If this is all how the Sabrina 2010 comic is getting magic wrong, that'll be weird, and do nothing but slow the pacing down. Speaking of slow pacing, we see the Archie gang on a Ferris wheel for no reason, and they notice that Jughead's with Sabrina and is trying to kiss her. I guess that makes sense, because when she taught him to love more than just food, it'd mean causing him to love the appearance of women too, and she just underestimated her own good looks. Still, that doesn't mean it's believable that he would try to kiss her without getting her permission. Just because he likes her looks a lot doesn't mean he wouldn't respect consent anymore or be so impossibly stupid as to provoke a witch, even if the former was the case, when it's not the 60s comics anymore. Sabrina apologizes and explains things to him, not that it helps because he just assumes it only awakened his true feelings. Somehow, all she does is run away from him and say that she'll be back when she has to wait to undo the spell. Excuse me? She'd just point and undo the spell. If she can cast a spell to effortlessly change someone's brain one way, she'd be able to cast a spell effortlessly to change his brain another way. Also, even if every spell was needlessly convoluted to undo in the 2010 comics, it's her own spell. Even the Joe C stories where Alexandra's witchcraft make more sense, because a snap of the fingers was all it took to delete a spell. Remember how cool Sabrina was in issue 1 of the 70s comic when she made Archie in love with her? She was cool as a cucumber there. She didn't freak out, even though he was kissing her hand. It makes sense though, because obviously people think Jughead is ugly. So she was okay with it because Archie is better looking than Jughead. But still, I prefer to look admirable and badass and powerful instead of a coward who runs away from her own spell because it instantly backfires on her. If every spell is hard to undo, this just seems to be another way in which 2010 Sabrina comics might be ruining the portrayal of magic. As the only thing that comes out of portraying it wrong is adding padding. The minute a witch would be faced with this problem, she'd instantly fix it. Are you telling me having an undo function in magic is hard? Obviously the right way to write this is to only have mortals deal with this Jughead, and not have a witch find out what happened to him until the end. Have her oblivious to the spell screwing up until then, or have an evil witch cast a spell if it's going to be a problem, because then it's more believable that it had bad consequences. It could be Darlene getting her revenge. The minute a story like this has obvious padding, it becomes boring and frustrating, making me wonder why I'm being shown all of these panels. It makes it obvious why Sabrina's stories used to be much shorter than 23 pages. A plot like this could have easily worked in just a few pages. And it kind of has already. This is like one of the many stories where she made Jughead fall for Ethel. This is hardly the first time she's cast a love spell and it backfired on her. Take a plot like this that would normally be a good Sabrina story, and all you have to do to make it frustrating garbage is make it last 23 pages. How about have her run out of magic after she cast that spell, because she was using magic too much that week? That's all you have to do to have it be justified that she doesn't undo the spells. On the bright side, maybe that means that the writer could be capable of writing a great Sabrina story, and it's just being forced by executives to have it stretch on for too many pages to be good, and then cause it to suck from padding. Okay, except it's not forced to be this way because it's easy to use up that extra comic space and still have good pacing for Sabrina's plot. Unless she wasn't allowed to do that either, it could have had a good subplot with her aunts. And Sabrina should have had a plot mostly about something unrelated to this. Until the end, where she casts her spell on him. Because it'd only take one panel for her to regret and undo that spell. Most of the time, if the writer just had more than one plot in an issue, both plots could have been properly paced when they're both constrained to one issue. That's why subplots were invented. It's a sign of someone being a bad writer when it's obvious that one change in writing style would make a huge improvement, and after dozens of issues, she still hasn't done it. This has wrecked my hope for all of the later Sabrina comics. I thought the stories not contained in a Sabrina comic would still be good, as they're not supposed to be part of its canon, so they don't have to be written like it. I was hoping this would just be one page in between actual Archie stories without her in it. It's no longer the 90s and 2000s. I thought they'd have learned by now to stop having her think she can't undo a spell. The changing of the art style back to a 70s style is supposed to indicate that everything went back to that. It made me think that things got good again. But it's misleading to do that if you kept this writer around. So don't be surprised if I completely ignore the Sabrina 2010s comics, unless I want to review a comic I know I'm going to hate. Because if it's still by her, I already know it sucks. Then there's more unacceptable padding because we see a bunch of pages without Sabrina in it for no reason. I could have figured that he tells friends about his new crush and get advised to give her a gift. He ends up causing someone to want to film his unusual behavior. Sabrina wastes time by somehow wondering how she could get him back to normal, and then she finds a solution. Jughead has some gifts and wastes more time with a cringeworthy scene where he embarrasses himself in front of his friends. We don't need any of the padding in this issue. It feels like it's going on forever. He runs after her and she lies that she'll only go out with him if he wins the burger contest. You know, this could have been written to happen right after she tried to run away from him the first time. And then the issue gets padded out somewhere by not instantly skipping to him winning the contest, which is insulting because we know he will. There's no reason for there to be more than 2 panels of this. All we needed is one panel where he loves eating burgers again. It's like he only lost the eating contest to make us think he might lose this one. But it's not gonna trick anybody. And it goes without saying, there's no reason he'd have to do this for a spell to break. Either way, she casts a new spell that would affect his brain, like the last one. So why didn't she just cast the spell the same way again? There's more unnecessary panels until he turns down Sabrina, and somehow he almost says spell in front of his friends. So she panics and shuts him up with a kiss because it's faster and looks mortal. The story ends with Raj the camera guy saying that I'll put the kiss on Facebook, even though it's obvious that Jughead won't want that anymore. And for no reason he runs from him instead of instantly giving him the camera back. So he's a jerk. What does he have against Jughead? Why are Archie and Betty being jerks by laughing? Betty's supposed to be nice, and all Archie has against him is that he asks for money too much. Too bad the story doesn't end with Sabrina erasing people's memories of its events, which is what she should have done for his sake. This issue about Jughead falling for Sabrina, oh no, was by Tanya Del Rio. Why is she still writing for Sabrina? The art style's changed, it's not the manga anymore. And it's not a story in a comic called Sabrina, and she was never qualified to begin with. Her writing's so forced that I can't imagine she'd have fan favorite job security. No wonder the story was forced to last so long by blatant padding. At first I thought it was going to be great and a return to the series' golden age because Sabrina finally looks like she's supposed to again and is back to living in Riverdale, or at least associating with the Archie gang, like she's supposed to. But instead it seems like a return to form is just there to try to trick the audience. I know Jughead learned she was a witch last issue, but it wasn't necessary for the story for him to know she's a witch and go to him for help. She should have already known that he's obsessed with food. And there's plenty of times where Sabrina used magic to help someone without their permission first. Why did it take her until now to cast a spell to make him love more than food? This would have been something she'd do after just a few days of knowing him. This is something she would have done when she first met Ethel, and learned her lesson from it. And I have a feeling that earlier versions of Sabrina would have cast a spell to make him win an eating contest no problem, avoiding this whole plot. Instead she's too moral to do that, but is perfectly fine with trying to change his brain. It's believable that she wouldn't anticipate him falling for her. She just underestimated her good looks. But where the story completely falls apart is that it lasts more than a few panels after the spell. Him coming on too strong because he likes her looks is really forced, because he wouldn't want to be impolite to a witch. And instead of her instantly undoing the spell with a point, like a witch who can change its brain in a second, Somehow, she has to tell him to participate in a burger eating contest to get him to stop loving her, even though the spell was about him loving everything, not about him not loving burgers anymore. The padding resulted because the writer wrote herself into a corner by having this happen too early, and felt like having Sabrina not know how to undo the spell. So there's a bunch of cringeworthy padding where Jughead humiliates himself in front of people he knows. It goes on too long for the issue to be good. At that point, I'd rather see him win an eating contest unfairly, as they probably would have won anyways. This might have been an okay story, but you don't make it last this long.